Hi, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. I'm Abram Kielsmeyer-Jones, and I will be with you for the next hour. I'm excited to spend this time together to talk with you about how to use accordance to keep and not lose your Hebrew and Greek. If you are here for the first time, especially a warm welcome to you, although I welcome all of you warmly. If you are new to the GoToWebinar interface, as you logged in, you ought to have seen a full control panel. That's what allows you to hear me and see me, or not see me, but see my screen and my cursor. There is also a handout section in your GoToWebinar control panel where you can access this PDF here that will guide our time together. Everything is outlined here and lots of hyperlinks. I wanted to be thorough here so you could easily refer to this again later. We are recording today's session as well, and if you are watching this on a recording, you can email me at abramkj@accordancebible.com for the handout. I'd be happy to send it to you. If you have questions or comments, the way that we do that is we've got a questions section of the GoToWebinar control panel, and you can type any questions or comments there at any time. I will stop from time to check in on those, and I'll either respond to them privately, or if it's a question for the group, I'll anonymously share that and respond. All right, so let's dive in. In terms of who I think this webinar makes the most sense for, given the title, I'm assuming that you've got some knowledge of Hebrew or Greek, or maybe both, that you want to keep and not lose. This is not so much about gaining knowledge of those things, although there are, of course, ways to do that in accordance. But whatever your background with Hebrew and Greek is, today's session ought to be, I think, fitting for readers using biblical languages at various levels. So maybe you've had multiple years, maybe you've had a semester or two. Maybe you already use Hebrew and Greek on a daily or weekly basis. Maybe it's been years. And so I hope that regardless of where you find yourself along those spectrums, that you will find something useful here. And so to that end, I offer multiple suggestions for keeping language use active. And again, this is all through the lens of using Accordance, in particular the desktop app. Of course, you can do a lot of what we do today, not all of it, but a lot of it on the mobile apps. But I'm doing this using a Mac. You may be on Windows. What we talk about will be relevant to Windows 2. I'm using Accordance 13. Of course, Accordance 14 is out. Everything ought to work in that and previous versions as well. But the idea is, how do you use Accordance, in particular the desktop app, to help you with your Hebrew and Greek? Probably more in the handout than we'll cover in person, and that's by design so that you've got kind of for further reading. So you can see here, just in terms of the structure of today, I offer a suggested setup. So here's one particular kind of setup to keep your Hebrew or your Greek. And with each setup, I say, here's what you need to know in accordance. So that's kind of the feature side of things, the technical side. And then I talk about what resources do you actually need within Accordance. So Accordance, of course, is a full-bodied app, and then you can add resources either as collections or a la carte. And so we'll talk about, first of all, from a feature standpoint, what do you need for this setup? And then what resources do you need? And you can see here I've got a diglot setup we'll talk about. We'll talk about single language with audio. We'll talk about looking at single language with diagrams and syntax, talk about vocabulary. We'll talk about grammar, textbook, and then just kind of two more sections here at the end. So as I say, hopefully something in here will connect with you and be something useful you can use to keep your Hebrew and Greek up. All right, let's talk first about the diglot. And of course, if you have questions, like I said, at any time, put them in the questions box. So a diglot is just two languages open at the same time. And so you might have a Greek New Testament and English text, or a Hebrew Bible and an English text. And what you need to know in Accordance for this is that Accordance has something called key number texts. And I've hyperlinked to this So if I'll just open this in accordance. We have an in-app web browser you can use. I'll paste that link in here. And so I won't read this all to you, but you've got a list here of the different keyed Bible texts or key number texts. And these are texts that, as it says here, they're tagged with key numbers, and that key number just identifies the original Hebrew or Greek word behind the English translation. And then these keyed Bible texts are your bridge between Hebrew and English, or Greek and English, as we're looking at today. And this talks about the Strong's numbering system. So the idea of a keyed Bible goes way back, and you can do this in print. And so the idea here being that if you didn't know the Greek alphabet or the Hebrew alphabet, it would be hard, if not impossible, to look a word up in a Hebrew or Greek lexicon. And so James Strong developed this sort of bridge system where you get a number assigned to a Greek and Hebrew word, and then you look up the number in your lexicon, and that's keyed to your Bible text in print. So it's all, and of course you can still do that in print, but Accordance does this all very quickly for you with its key number texts. So I'll demonstrate this, but here's kind of the background behind it. And not every Bible text has key numbers, but if it does, it will say it on the product page. And typically, once you've got your library open, if you see an S at the end, that means Strong's. So New King James, NKJV, S with Strong's. ESV with Strong's, KJV with Strong's. And not just English too, there are other languages as well here, German, Spanish, Chinese. And so you may also see GK Goodrich Kohlenberger. That's just a different numbering system. Let's open one of these up. We're going to use a keyed number text. So that's the first resource you need. And again, you may have this already in your library. The product page will tell you, but you can even see here NRSV S, so with Strong's. Notice, for example, the NRSV updated edition, the new version of the NRSV, not tagged with Strong's numbers, at least not yet. And so it doesn't have an S there. So if I want to do a key number text, find one that has an S. So here's NRSV with Strong's. And I'll open this up. And so basically, it's as simple as this. If I want to know what is the Hebrew word for, say, God in Genesis 1:1, I can hover over that word, and my cursor is right here where the blue circle is. And in the instant details, I can see H0430. That's the Strong's number, H standing for Hebrew, 0430. But Accordance does a little more than that for me. I could look up the Strong's number now in a Hebrew lexicon, but Accordance is doing all of this for me. So here's Elohim, the Hebrew characters, and if I don't know the Hebrew characters, here's the transliteration, Elohim. And I could, of course, look this up in a Strong's dictionary, but I've got the number there. And I'm seeing the Hebrew word underlying the English already just by hovering over it. And you can do this very quickly with these instant details. So any of these words that I want to know, what's the Hebrew, I can hover over them and I'll get that information. And a translation equivalent, that will just pop up right here in the instant details. Same thing with Greek. If I were to go to John 1:1, in the beginning was the word, hover over, and I get logos, and there's the transliteration, and here is the translation equivalent, also known as the gloss. Same thing for God, theos. And again, the number G for Greek 2316. And I'm kind of off and running in terms of that question of what's the underlying Hebrew or underlying Greek here. Now, that's just the English translation, but the goal today is not to access Greek and Hebrew without knowing it. It's to actually keep our Hebrew and Greek, or maybe revisit it. And so we want Greek and Hebrew open. And so I will open up a biblical Hebrew text. So here's BHS. Of course, I can expand the font size. Now, if I go back to Genesis 1:1, and if I open up that same NRSV with Strong's that I had, the same thing is I can still access, as I hover over God, I can see Elohim, but you'll notice that when I hover over God, it is cross-highlighting right here, Elohim in the Hebrew text. And this is bidirectional. So if I'm reading the Hebrew text first, Bereshit bara Elohim, and I hover over Elohim here, it cross highlights God in the English text. That's because it's a key number text. And now, just by virtue of having a tagged Hebrew text, the BHS in this case, and a key number English text, now I can see this cross highlighting in real time. So the Strong's number is still there. I can hover over it just from English to see the underlying Hebrew and the Strong's number. I can get into the Strong's dictionary too, although I don't necessarily need to. But I can also hover over a given Hebrew word and see its corresponding English translation with cross highlighting. Now, why this is advantageous is that perhaps you are a few years removed from Hebrew or Greek, but you want to get going with it again. And so you may be reading this through, kind of keeping your eye as much as possible on the Hebrew. In fact, one thing I will do is I will click and drag this divider. I will actually make sometimes I'll make the Hebrew text larger. I might even make the English text smaller just to kind of keep my eyes on the Hebrew as much as possible. But you can do this however you want. Of course, you can customize the font and all that. But then I might read through Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim va'et haaretz. Maybe I get to a word like vohu, and I maybe don't remember what that is. So now I can just glance over to the right and see that this is void or formless void. I can also see it in the instant details, and I can continue to read through my text in this way. That's it. All I've got is two texts open right now, a Hebrew Bible and a key number text. There's more, of course, that we could say about the key number text and how it works, but those are the basics of it. And this is enough to be able to read through whatever text. You might start with Genesis 1. You might do Jonah 1, which is, or the book of Jonah, or the book of Ruth, which are easier Hebrew typically than some other books. Everything I'm showing you here works with Greek too. So I might take the NA28, and I'll open that. Of course, all the font can be adjusted. I might open a parallel NRSV or something else with Strong's. Here's the NET. We can take that just to take another example. We'll go to John 1:1, and here we've got halagos, and it's in the instant details, but it also cross highlights into English at the right. And it's instant, as the name suggests. I'm hovering over words and seeing them in English. And again, vice versa. I could start from English and then look at the Greek. But maybe it's been a really long time and you want to start with an English text and then hover over as many English words as you can to see what Greek they're translating. For an added challenge, you could close the English translation and just use the instant details only as needed. And so depending on where you're at, any word you hover over, of course, you're going to see it in the instant details. And you can just say, all right, well, I'm going to read as much as I can. And when I don't know a word, I'll hover over it. In fact, if you want, you can even close the instant details. Only see Greek. I'll make this font bigger. And then you can still activate the instant details in this way by clicking and holding. And so that same information that I was seeing at the bottom, I'm seeing now. So maybe you just say, whenever I need a word, I'm just going to click and hold. Otherwise, I've got all Greek. Maybe that's something to kind of work your way up to. But this all kind of fits with the idea of a diglot, or again, if you get to a good point, maybe you close the English translation altogether. But because of the key numbering system, this cross highlighting works. You can see it in the instant details. You can click and hold for a popover. You can very easily answer questions like, what is the Greek that this word is translating? Or vice versa. I'm looking at the Greek, how is this translated? Of course, the kind of souped up version of this is you can open multiple translations at once, but we just looked at one translation open with Hebrew or Greek. And then I just mentioned this here again, it said this already, but you could start in Jonah or Ruth for Hebrew. A good English starting place, I'm sorry, that should say Greek. I need to fix that. A good Greek starting place is First John or Mark. And so you might consider a reading plan with this particular setup. And just think about, are you reading slowly for vocabulary and grammar? Do you want to read greater volume for flow and general understanding of how the language works? These are questions you could return to. And even with some of these other setups, you could be asking that same question. For example, we're going to look at diagrams and syntax. That would probably be if you were reading more with an eye toward grammar and maybe even reading more slowly. You might do that with the diagrams or the syntax. But you may also just open up something like this. I'll go to Window and Instant Details and leave those open. And you may just kind of read through a chapter a day or a chapter a week. I don't know what feels fast to you, but those are some questions for you to consider based on where you're at. What do I need to most do? Do I need to work on my grammar? Do I need to gain vocabulary? Or is my vocabulary good enough that I can just start reading and pick it up as I go? Those are some questions to ask. But I think for multiple levels of language proficiency, this diglot setup ought to be helpful. Let me stop there and check in on questions. We have had full hour webinars on key number text, so I know there's more that could be said about that, but I want to hear from you and see questions that you've got. Okay, please show instant details pop over again. Sure, I can do that. So if I want, and again, this is all just personal preference, but it may be, and I've certainly been in situations where I said, it's not like English is cheating, it's all good things to be reading, but maybe I'm disciplining myself. And so I will not, in that case, have an English text open. And, this instant details is so easy. I'm just barely flicking my wrist, or not even my wrist, my finger around, and I'm seeing everything. So yeah, I do practice sometimes closing that window. And in that case, I will just click and hold. And then you can see any word you want in the instant details. Click and hold, and it will show as a popover. And then when you're done with it, just click outside of it. Yeah, somebody says, can one diglot Hebrew and Greek? Yes, you can. And we will talk about that at the end, but I'll just briefly show you. Actually, let me come back to that at the end, but I will. So yes, thank you. I want to spend a little bit of time answering that, but that's a great method to do, especially if you know both languages and want to keep them both up. So I'll come back to that. Let me know if you have any other questions, and I will continue. A lot of these kind of build on each other. So this next thought, or this next proposed setup, is a single language with audio. And the reason for this is that the more senses we engage, really in anything, the better we learn a thing. And that's certainly true with language. And, we have the added kind of disadvantage of biblical Hebrew and Koine Greek as such are not spoken. Of course, Hebrew is still spoken, but it's modern Hebrew, and Greek is modern Greek. And so you would be hard pressed to find settings where you could practice those, although there is a growing movement, a growing pedagogy that says, well, if we learn language by speaking it, let's just do it anyway with biblical Hebrew and Koine Greek. So you could maybe find a place that's doing that. But generally speaking, we are learning these languages. Many people learn biblical Greek and biblical Hebrew for the purpose of reading the Bible in its original languages. And so even while that's true, we still want to think about, well, how can I engage multiple senses beyond just reading the text kind of silently? And so short of actually speaking Koine Greek or biblical Hebrew to each other, using audio, I think, is really helpful. And so all you need to know for accordance is the add parallel pane for this. So I'm going to open up that same Greek text here and now go to add parallel. And what you need to do, well, what you need to have is an audio Bible. So I maybe should mention that first. So for this, you need a Greek Bible or a Hebrew Bible, and then there's a hyperlink to it here if you want to look at it in the store. There's an audio Greek New Testament and audio Hebrew Bible. So the way to access those is, suppose you've got your Greek text open, we just opened it, and you go to add parallel. Now, unfortunately, the more resources you get, the more stuff can kind of get buried here in the add parallel pane, and so you may be kind of looking for a while before you find where is the audio in my list here. And so a nice workaround that I found is I will just type in GNT audio. And of course, you can open it up in a separate zone like this. But having opened that, it now goes up to the top of my recent modules, and this is how I access it. So it's maybe an extra step, but it's quick enough. I've done this enough. I'm used to it now, kind of do that second nature. So again, that's just opening it from the library. And then when you go to add parallel, it'll be at the top of recent modules. We'll do this again with the Hebrew Bible in a minute. And now, whether my instant details are showing or not, that can use that popover or have them open there or both. Now what I'm doing is I'm reading through an original language text, and I've got the audio open right next to it. With both the Greek and Hebrew audio, you could listen to the whole thing, but it also splits it out into verses so that you can access it side by side. And again, back to that the end here, what's your goal here? Do you want to just get a sense of how the language works, what it feels like, what it sounds like? If that's the case, you might listen to a chapter at a time or a few verses at a time. Do you really want to kind of improve your vocabulary? Well, in that case, you might be more slowly listening to the audio. So that's up to you. And Accordance tries to make this easy by giving you both a link to the chapter as a whole, so you can access that right here. If I open this whole thing, that's John 1 as a whole, and I can access an individual verse. So I'm reading verse 3, and if I just click on this, and I believe you'll be able to hear this through my computer. Panta dia tu eginata, kai horisa tu eginata udehin hageganin. All right, so and then that actually keeps going. What this does, if I had let it play. In auto zoein, kai he zoein tafos ton anthropon. Kai tafos. So it keeps playing. So what this is doing is it's starting the chapter file at verse 5. And if I only want to hear verse 5, I need to press stop or pause, or I can keep going. So that's up to you. So Accordance wants you to have a couple different ways to use that, but the idea being that you may want to just do this a verse at a time. And if you're in John 1:14, you don't want to have to kind of scroll through the chapter file and find it. It will take you right there. So that's the idea behind that. Same thing with Hebrew. So we'll do that. I'm going to open up that Hebrew text that I had before. Oops, that's the apparatus. All right, and Jonah being a good place to start, as I mentioned. And so I could go to add parallel and find somewhere in here where the audio is, which of course I can often not remember myself. And so yeah, it's somewhere in here. But it doesn't matter because we can do the shortcut here, which is go to audio OT verses. I can open that and now add parallel, and here it is at a recent module. And you'll notice there's a lot of space here, a lot of white, well, it's gray space in this case. And so, you can resize your window. You can combine this with the whole diglot setup that we talked about before. So maybe, like I say, the setups I'm showing you today, I mean, you could think of them as modular. They can build on each other. So you could even have an English text open and do it like this. But if you just wanted to work on the Hebrew audio, you could do a setup like this. And this is like the Greek in the sense that you've got, there are, I don't have it installed, but there are chapter files that you can download separately. I've just got the individual verses installed. And so if I'm in Jonah 1:1, I can click on the audio icon. And in this case, that actually stops there. These are actual single verse files. But like I say, you can get the OT chapters. I just don't have it downloaded onto this computer. Now, this is a great audio Bible. I linked to it here. This one, well, nothing against the Greek New Testament, but this one is a little bit more produced. It's dramatically read. And so you'll get, actually, I can show you in Genesis 1:1. Let's see, I need to get God saying something was good. You're going to actually get kind of a booming, echoey. Here, let's try 1:9.
ויאמר אלוהים, יקבעו המים מתחת השמיים אל מקום אחד, ותראה היבשה.
So a little reverb there, you know, kind of set it apart. And the idea there is to make it more engaging and, again, to use another sense, but also to maybe put yourself in the story a little bit. So that's it. There's not much to this setup. It's really just knowing the add parallel function, and you can open it as a recent module like I've done, that kind of workaround to save you the time combing through this menu. But you could also even just open it in a separate zone and get yourself to wherever you are that way, and resize as needed to make the screen look how you want it to look. But that's a great method, and especially you know, if you're at a place where you know you don't have other people to read with, you can kind of almost approximate that by hearing a professional reader, native speaker in the case of the Hebrew Bible, and even repeating it back, pausing the audio to do so. I'm happy to move on to diagrams and syntax, but also just want to check in with you and see if there are any questions or comments about that audio setup. All right, let's talk about this. I think kind of takes you to another level of engagement, in part because it's more atomistic. So it's more looking at how the words and parts of speech fit together. But this very well may be the place that you're at. And so I want to offer this, that the idea here is a single language with diagrams and or syntax. And all you need to know in accordance is the add parallel pane. Well, you need to be able to navigate the library here, but I've already got the BHS open. And so I'll go to add parallel, and these have their own little categories here. They're very easy to find. So I can open up, well, there's three different, well, there's more than three, but there are three different syntaxes in one diagram. So 4 things in total that I can open up. There's a diagram tool for the Greek New Testament. There's a syntax tool for the Greek New Testament. And there are 2 syntax tools for the Hebrew Bible. I'll unpack these as we go. And they're all available as separate standalone modules. You can see they're hyperlinked here in the handout. But the idea here is, I think, probably twofold. One is to understand, like I said, at a more microscopic level, how the words fit together in a text. And also how visually, just to see the words kind of lined up. And so I find that useful. This is a lot of text. Even if I make the spacing between the lines bigger, which you can do with the gear icon, even if you make the background look, a softer color and expand the font. That's a lot of text. And so having one of these other tools open can be useful. Let's actually start with Greek. That one's probably a little easier to understand initially. So NA28, and I'm going to open a parallel pane. And for this, I'm going to start with the diagram of Greek New Testament. Now, these diagrams may look familiar to you. Maybe you use them in Greek. Maybe you have learned them in English or another language. I have hyperlinked to this article by Randy Leedy. It's a PDF. I'll show you. If I just copy the link and go to a web browser, he talks about well, he talks about why you might be interested in this, but he actually kind of unpacks a little bit what it is. This is a great article, and he has diagrammed the entire Greek New Testament. The one we have in accordance is not done by him; it's done by somebody else, but it's the same approach. And the idea is, in short, that you've got a horizontal line that's split by a vertical line. And at the left of the vertical line is the subject. So in this case, halagos in John 1:14. And at the right of the vertical line is the predicate. That is everything that is said about the subject, which typically includes a verb and other modifiers. And then it builds off of that. So you've got a compound subject here, or rather a compound verb with one subject, but the short version of, I mean, if we go to here, here's a nice example. Jesus wept. This is a great illustration of this tool. At the left, you've got ha Jesus, so that's the subject. And at right, you've got a dakrusein, which is the predicate. So Jesus wept. That's probably the best place to start in understanding the diagrams. But then they build on each other, and so you get modifiers. So here's un for therefore. Hoi iodaioi is the subject. Elegon is the predicate, or it's the verb. But what do they say? Well, they say, see how much he loved him. And so that gets its own structure here. So the kind of most basic breakdown is subject at left, predicate at right, but then you get these branches and diagonal lines, and this is referred to as the Kellogg-Reed style of diagramming. And if you already know how to use it in English, great. If not, I would just, there's a good Wikipedia article on it. You can check out Randy Leedy here. But this is a useful way to make sense of the text, especially, actually, we were just in this with the Mark Translation Notes webinar yesterday. We had this great, this I think helped me anyway. We've got this, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind and all your strength. And it just kind of shows you agapeses, this main verb here, you shall love. That X there is an implied subject, so it's included in the verb. But then how do you love God? Well, with this, with this, with this, with this. So you see with, separated by three kais or ands, and then you get the heart, and then all the heart, and your all the heart. And so all the modifiers are there. This is not a terribly complex Greek sentence, but it is nice to see it visualized. And when you get into things like maybe the classic example of this is Ephesians 1:3 and following, and I need to resize my screen so this all fits, but this is a very long sentence in Greek, and you may be able to make sense of it without a diagram, but you may also find the diagram helpful. So these diagrams, I'm often opening them to see, okay, where's the main verb, where's the participle? Of course, the parsing will give you that information, but adding that visual element is useful. And then I'll just briefly go over these, but the Greek syntax tool, there's that's available as well. And this is a different way of understanding the text. I mean, if I go to John 11:35 again, we're going to see it's short and simple, but it uses a different nomenclature and even a different structure. And so you've got here a dakrusin, so there's the predicate, ha Jesus, there's the subject, and that F goes in front of ha, that says that's a specifier, a definite article, and that N labels it as an independent clause. So this is labeling the functions of the words a little bit more than kind of the parts of speech approach here. Not only that, but the diagrams tool puts the order in a way that makes it's sort of like a grammatical logic to it. But it will change the word order of the text. So here you've got ha Jesus e dakrusin. Well, you can't read the biblical text off of these diagrams left to right because, in fact, the verb is first here. The syntax tool preserves that, and it's just a different approach. They've just got different aims. And all these hyperlinks here will tell you more if you're interested in this. This gets a little bit more advanced, especially with these diagrams, or I'm sorry, with these syntax trees. But they're super useful when you're wanting to really analyze the text. By the way, this syntax tool, you can move it down and it will look like this. So maybe you like that approach better. Looking at it that way, but you can see where this gets, I mean, it gets really nested really quickly with different parts of the sentence. I will just allude to the Hebrew one. It's similar to this Greek one, but if I go to a Greek text here and open it, syntax, and like I said, we've got two different Hebrew syntax trees, but they're similar to what I was just showing with the Greek in the sense that it will tell you what this all is. So predicate and its modifiers, subject, and then you can see here these arcs are nested. So you can have here something like a complement, but that even divides down into other things. I'll stop there. I'm happy to take questions, but much more documentation is here. The goal, again, here is to go more in depth with what is the text doing, what is this definite article, how is it functioning, how is this preposition functioning, what goes with what, and especially in texts that get long, and in Greek, you've got lots of participles, for example. This can help give you a visual representation and just add kind of another element to your refreshing your Hebrew and Greek. I will stop there. We'll go on to vocabulary next. Let me just check in and see what questions you have. Here's somebody asked costs. What costs am I looking at? Well, it depends. So anything in the handout that's underlined will take you to the product page that will have the cost listed. And so it will vary. I mean, I think typically when starting with accordance, once you decide you want in, so to speak, you may want to get some kind of basic collection that will have a group of resources, but these audio ones are add-ons, and so $70 for the Greek New Testament. I think the Hebrew one is comparable. There's a cost to these diagrams and syntax tools, but everything is listed there on the hyperlinks if you follow it through. And I'm not here to sell you anything. I'm here to hopefully help you learn accordance. So I think don't underestimate, I mean, if I may offer this counsel, don't underestimate how much you can do with what you may already have. Even if you've just got the trial, I forget what the collection is, like Accordance Light or something. I think you get the first 3 chapters of Hebrew. I mean, that could be your next, 2 weeks of just great diet of Hebrew and with the instant details, and that, I mean, maybe that's enough. So I think a number of us who have been using Accordance for a long time, there's always this kind of resource accumulation temptation. That's the same thing as over full bookshelves. But you may be able to do everything you need to with what you already have. So I would just offer that as a possibility. All right, let's talk about vocabulary in accordance. This is obviously a key part of learning the language. It's not the only part, but it's a big part. And in any Greek or Hebrew textbook or Spanish or French or German or Latin textbook that I've ever seen, or Chinese or any language, you're going to get vocabulary lists pretty early on. It may not be the first chapter, but very early on, it's going to be, all right, here's how to say the, here's how to say man, woman, boy, girl, horse, whatever it is. So presumably, if you've had Hebrew and Greek, you've got some of that, but vocabulary is just really easy to go. In fact, in my experience, the grammar and some of the deeper structural pieces of the language stay with me a lot longer than the vocabulary, which just can be very easy to forget. So what you could do as a setup is think specifically in terms of vocabulary. And so in this setup, what I'm after is reading the biblical text with vocabulary specific highlights so that you can basically see as you're reading what are low frequency, what are rarely occurring words, what are highly occurring words, which words should I focus on? You might say, for example, I'm going to read through the book of Jonah, and I can look up any word at any time with the instant details, but maybe let's say I'm just going to really focus on words that occur 100 times or fewer. That's what I want to learn, and maybe words that occur 101 times and more. So in accordance, there is this count command that you can use. I'm in a Hebrew text right now. I'm going to go to words. I'm going to enter this count command. The multi-step process I'm about to walk through, but it's all listed here. And I can enter that command by right-clicking, go to enter command, and here's count. There's also a keyboard shortcut, so I could do Shift Command U. I could also go to the search menu, enter command count. You could also just start typing C-O-U-N-T. Now notice it's starting to type in Hebrew and it's right to left. It doesn't know what I'm doing, but it gives me some options. And so are you searching some Hebrew word, or do you want this command? So however you get the count command, we'll go enter command and count. Now what you can do is tell Accordance, I'm looking for frequency count. That's the count command. And so I'm looking for words that occur 100 times or fewer, or between 1 and 100 times. You can do it that way, or you could just type in 100 minus. If you just type in count 100, it will literally show you words that occur 100 times, which is great, but you want words in this scenario that occur 100 times or fewer. So we do 100 minus, or we do count 1 to 100. This search is going to take a little bit longer. It shouldn't be taking this long, but this search will take longer because there are, of course, many more hit results. But here is the result of my search. So I've told Accordance, find and highlight all the words that occur 100 times or fewer in the Hebrew text. Same thing in the Greek text. You would have done the same command, entered the same way. And now what I'm seeing is hit highlights. So these aren't permanent highlights, but it's showing in red and bold words that occur 100 times or fewer. Now this is useful because maybe I'm kind of testing myself a little bit. Maybe I'm saying, all right, I'm always free to look at the instant details at any time, but I'm going to really try to not look at it unless it's bold and red. And so I'll puzzle out with the other ones, I puzzle my way out of it. What looks like is happening here is that Genesis 1, 2, and 3 are missing. In fact, they are not. The search has been run as it should be. It's just that those two verses don't have they don't have words occurring 100 times or fewer. In other words, every word in Genesis 1, 2, and 1, 3 occur 101 times or more. And that's a good thing because that means I ought to be able to read those verses easily. But where are they? Well, all I have to do, the context slider is set to 0 here because it's just showing verses with hits. It's just showing me verses where words occur 100 times or fewer, but I want to see the whole text. So slide that all the way to A. Your hit results will be preserved, but now you'll see them in context. And so I've got, here's verse 3, and it has, it's all black. And so I'm only seeing words that occur 101 times or more. And I've got the whole text now. So I can make my way through the text this way. And this gives me a sense of, all right, if the goal is 101 times or more, what words won't I know? Well, it's all these words that are bold and in red, but look how many are black. That's still a pretty good number that I'm going to know. You could skip this ahead to your book of choice, Jonah, and you'll see the same thing here. A lot of words in black, not as many in red, actually. Even as you scroll on here, this is pretty good. This is why Jonah gets recommended. And so that would be one way you could read through the text. So you can do this now. Again, all these are stackable. You could do this with another language. You could do this with an audio. You could do it with diagrams. You could just do it like this, single language on its own with the vocabulary highlighted in that way. There is one other thing you can do here, and I've just kind of noted this as something that's optional. But this is perfectly fine and functional to read through, but it does kind of mean that if you get rid of this, like if you want to rerun another search, those highlights go away. So if I just rerun this search again, it will give me the hit results in bold and in red, and you can actually highlight them in a permanent way. I mean, nothing's ever fully permanent. You can unhighlight them, but you can actually highlight them more than just this hit results way. And I note that is shift click if you've got an active highlights file showing. And for that, I'll show the toolbar. We'll go to highlights. I'm going to change my file. I'm going through this kind of quickly. And shift equals hits is my reminder right there. So if whatever my highlight file is, if I have yellow, for example, and if I click yellow, but if I hold down shift, it's going to say, are you sure that you want to highlight every hit in the front window? I do. And what it will do is highlight every word, every hit. And see, now when I get rid of that command, now they're like permanently highlighted. And this is great. Now I've got a text that has whatever the frequency is that I need to have highlighted. And okay, these are the words I'm going to not worry about looking these up, because of course I don't know them. I haven't learned them or relearned them yet. Suppose a month goes by and you want to change it to 75 times. I know this is getting highly detailed, but this is one way we gain language, is by improving our vocabulary. You would rerun the search, and then what you want to do is unhighlight it. You would want to clear the highlights, which is taking a little bit longer than I wanted it to. But you would just simply clear those highlights and then rerun a search and do some other ones. So I'm holding down shift, and now that clear hits occurs. And so it's going to clear these highlights, and I can repeat the process with another number if I want to. And everything I'm showing you here works in Greek as well. And so resources you would need is a Greek Bible, a Hebrew Bible. You can do this with a Septuagint. This is one of those setups that does not require any additional modules. So presumably you've got an original language text in your library, or if you're going to be using accordance for languages, you'll want one. This is a nice way to take advantage of something you already have. I'm going to keep going, but I welcome your comments and questions on that. I want to just share a couple other approaches, and then we'll leave time at the end for questions. Another thing you can do to keep your Hebrew and Greek fresh is to do what you might have done the first time you were learning Hebrew and Greek, and that is to go to a grammar textbook. There will be varying degrees of excitement depending on who you are and your preferred learning style. Even within yourself, you may sometimes really want to look at a grammar and sometimes not. But Accordance has multiple grammars for both Hebrew and Greek, grammar textbooks. And so you can, those are typically available a la carte. There may be some that are bundled together with other things. But if you want to see what's available, you could go to the store and just search grammar. You can also go to your library and see what you may already have. I'm going to open up, let's switch over to Greek now. I learned on Mounce. This is Mounce's Basics of Biblical Greek. I've got the 3rd edition. I don't have the most up-to-date one, but it's up to the 4th edition now in Accordance. And as you could in print or a Kindle or whatever kind of simplified version, you can just navigate through the table of contents here, find what you want to find, and get to reading. You can also search by titles, and so maybe you want to work on participles. So I'm going to see where those are in titles. I've got 30 hits. You can also search by scripture, and so maybe you're doing some of these in tandem with each other. Maybe you're reading through 1 John, for example, and you want to look at some of the grammatical questions that arise. So I can search this grammar for scripture references or even a whole book. So 11 hits. That's not a lot, but it's enough that I could read through those and see what examples he gives from 1 John. Maybe I take a little bit of time and read through these before I read through 1 John, and I'm just ready for those few verses where they come up. Same thing with the Hebrew grammar. You could go to a scripture, the scripture search field, type in Jonah, 20 hits there, and kind of keep that in mind as you go. This can be even more integrated than this, because if you have a text open, you can add a parallel and info pane, and it will basically open your grammars for you to the verse under consideration. So if I'm in Jonah 1:1, if I have a grammar that has that verse in it, it will show up. So I scrolled ahead to Jonah 1:2, 1:3. This is basically a quick link to any grammars that have that verse. But if you're starting from the grammar itself, know that you can, of course, browse it as you would a book in any other format, but you can also utilize these search fields to really get at the content you might want, whether that's titles or maybe you want to see every time the imperative is mentioned throughout the grammar. And you can also get to the vocabulary very quickly this way. By just searching. I think the way to do this is an asterisk with a question mark, and that's going to just quickly show you all of the vocabulary in the book. You can just navigate your way through word by word if you want to do it that way. Of course, you could also browse through here and get to the vocabulary sections there. So that's another kind of tool in your tool belt to consider, is working your way through a grammar textbook, whether that's systematically reading it through, or whether that's using the search feature because maybe you're looking at a particular category or wanting to refresh yourself or coming at it from a particular passage. Accordance tries to make that easy by giving you these different search fields, so there are lots of ways that you can utilize the grammars. Let me know if you have questions about vocabulary or grammar textbooks. I'll share a couple things in conclusion, but let's just pause there and see what questions or comments arise, either when it comes to learning vocabulary and that count command, or working through a grammar textbook and taking advantage of that. All right, let me share a little bit more. We'll start to wrap up, and if you've got questions or comments on anything I've shared or on anything I haven't talked about, maybe you came with a particular question or curiosity that hasn't been addressed, I would love to know about it and do my best to respond. So again, you can utilize that questions box and type it in there. I just suggest here this ongoing approach of having Greek or Hebrew always open when working on any text. And I apologize, I know that sounds kind of patently obvious, but it hasn't been patently obvious to me. And so I remind myself as much as anything, and maybe it's something like something as simple as I am copying and pasting text from the Bible for the bulletin. And so I, just, pick your version, whatever you use. And so maybe it's, I don't know, John 1, maybe it's all of John 1. I'm just making this up. And so I can do that, but maybe I want to also take that as an opportunity to just kind of peek at the Greek a little bit. Maybe I've got 45 minutes to work on the bulletin, but I can take 2 minutes to read a verse or two in Greek. And so just every opportunity you've got to have a parallel pane of Greek or Hebrew open, I would recommend it. Maybe you're reading through a theology book, either in accordance or in print. And so you're looking at a particular word. Maybe the word is, I don't know, resurrection. Well, you may be inclined to do that in English if that's most comfortable language for you, but why not also open up a Greek text and look at that as you go? So any scenario where you're in accordance, and maybe you're not thinking like, oh, it's time to learn Greek and Hebrew, maybe you're doing something else, but you can still open up a parallel Greek or Hebrew text. That's something I have found useful for myself. And then it's sort of like added bonus. Maybe I already did Greek or Hebrew that day, or maybe that would have been a day I didn't do it. And because I took 2 extra minutes while I was researching resurrection, now I've kind of regained or improved my Greek or Hebrew just a little bit more. This was a question at the beginning, and I said I would get to it. Hebrew and Greek at the same time is a great way to go here if you want to keep both languages fresh, if you want to resuscitate the languages, as it were. And the way to do this is through the Septuagint, which was the Hebrew Bible translated into Greek. And so you need a Hebrew text, you need a Septuagint text to do this, which I can open. Actually, I'll open this as a parallel. And you can decide whether you want to have English here or not. If you do, keep in mind that most of your English translations translate the Hebrew in the Old Testament. And so there are Septuagint specific English translations. But we don't need to get into that now. We're just talking about Greek and Hebrew together. By virtue of having the MTLXX parallel tool, and let me know if you have questions about that, but if you've got that installed in your library, and I didn't link to it, so I can show you that. But what's happening now is I've got cross highlighting from Hebrew to Greek. And that's super useful because I can see, for example, how the Greek translates the Hebrew at the word level. And so here's Yahweh or Adonai, and it's Kyrios in Greek. Here's Gadol for great, and it's Megalo in Greek. And so on. So this, and I've found this, maybe out of everything I've shared, this for me personally has been my favorite way to keep my languages going, because there are many words that I don't know in both Hebrew and Greek, but the chances are, at least a little bit, that if I don't know a word in Hebrew, I might know it in Greek. And so even without recourse to an English language, I can make my way now through the Hebrew text a little bit better, because I may not know this word in Hebrew, but if I know it in Greek, all the better. And of course, you can open up instant details, you can open up a parallel English translation. We've talked about that. So you can modify this how you want to. But this Hebrew to Greek cross highlighting I found to be especially effective and motivating. It's slower, but this is also a great way to read through the Psalms. Here's Psalm 23. Of course, the numbering, the versification varies in the Septuagint version. But this is just a great way to do both languages at once. And that cross highlighting happens by virtue of the MTLXX parallel tool. So if you're not seeing cross highlighting, you will need this I'll put the link in the chat here. Oh, this is on sale right now. I didn't even realize that. All right, let me put this in the chat. This is the full parallel, which the product page will show you, but you can actually see them lined up like this. But to enable the cross highlighting that I was just showing you, you don't need the full parallel, you need the interlinear database. So if you want to do something more on a budget, that's there. But this is, like I said, this is kind of the best way that I found out of everything I've shared. Now, if you just know Hebrew or just know Greek, this may not be as useful to you, but yeah, that Hebrew-Greek diglot I find super useful. All right, let me stop there and just reiterate what I said before. I think there probably are more ideas in the handout than we were able to cover in person, and there's certainly more ways to use Accordance to learn Hebrew and Greek. I've tried to offer the ones I found the most helpful, including ones I think are hopefully accessible that you can already do with what you already have in your library. But I'm happy to take any questions that you've got. I'm going to stop the recording and then I'll stay on for a couple minutes. If you're watching on the recording and want the handout, abramkj@accordancebible.com, and I'd be happy to give that to you over email.